My name is Nora. I am 31 years old, and until the night of October the 14th, I believed I was the kind of woman who trusted without question. I was not jealous, not suspicious, not the kind of wife who checked her husband's phone or searched his jacket pockets or asked twice when a first answer was perfectly reasonable. I had been married to Daniel for 5 years, and I had never once, not once, done anything to test whether the trust one placed in him was deserved. That is the story I told myself. The true story is more complicated. The true story is that I had been carrying something for the past 2 months that I had not told Daniel about, had not told anyone about, and had been pressing down inside myself with such steady pressure that I was no longer sure what shape it had taken. The night of October the 14th, it came up. My best friend Nadia put a question in my head at 9 o'clock in the evening, and by 10:47, when my phone was lit up in my hand and my husband was asleep beside me, I had done something I cannot fully explain except to say that fear makes people do things they would not otherwise do. Nadia and I had been friends since university. 14 years of knowing each other, through bad relationships and good ones, through job changes and moving cities, and the particular turbulence of our late 20s when everything felt provisional and nothing felt certain. She knew me in the specific way that only someone who has watched you make most of your major decisions can know you. She knew which of my fears were reasonable and which ones I was carrying forward from things that had happened before Daniel, before my marriage, before I had any real evidence for them in my current life. She had never said anything negative about Daniel in 5 years. She liked him. They got along well at dinners and holidays and the kind of easy social occasions where you can see whether two people actually tolerate each other or are only managing to coexist for your benefit. So when she sat across from me at dinner that Thursday evening and said what she said, I did not immediately dismiss it the way I would have if it had come from someone who did not know us. I listened, and then I laughed it off. And then I went home and could not stop thinking about it. What she said was this: "Are you sure Daniel is as loyal as you think?" She said it gently, without accusation, in the specific tone she used when she was raising something she had been sitting with for a while and had decided needed to be said even though she knew it would be uncomfortable. I asked her what she meant. She said she had seen something a few weeks ago. She was vague about the details, just that Daniel had been somewhere she did not expect him to be, talking to someone she did not recognize, in a way that had given her a feeling she could not shake. She said she was probably wrong. She said she did not want to create a problem that did not exist. She said she just thought I should know she had seen it, and that maybe I should pay attention. I told her Daniel was not that kind of person. She nodded and said she hoped she was wrong. We changed the subject and finished dinner, and I drove home and told myself it was nothing. Daniel was asleep when I got in. I watched him breathe for a long time in the dark. Then I picked up my phone. The idea came to me fully formed, the way things do when you have been suppressing something long enough that it builds into a complete plan without your conscious participation. I would create a number. I would send him a message from it. I would find out, once and for all, whether the man asleep beside me was truly the man I believed him to be. I told myself it was reasonable. I told myself it was small. I just needed to know. I told myself that if he passed the test, I would delete the number and never think about it again, and we would go on exactly as we always had been. What I did not tell myself was what would happen if he failed. What the act of testing someone says about the person doing the testing. I chose not to think about any of that. I downloaded an app that generates temporary phone numbers. I set up the new contact, gave it no real name, and saved it simply as unknown. I typed the first message 3 times before I sent it. My hands were not entirely steady. My husband was breathing slowly beside me, completely unaware. The first message I sent said, "Hi, I know this is random, but I saw you today at the gym. You looked really good. I couldn't stop thinking about you." I read it back 4 times after I sent it. It was carefully vague. It did not accuse him of anything specific. It could have been from anyone. It was designed to be exactly tempting enough to produce a real response without being so extreme that it would seem obviously fake. I had thought about this. I had spent the entire drive home from dinner constructing the logic of it. I put my phone face down on the nightstand after I sent it and stared at the ceiling and tried to breathe at a normal rate. 10 minutes passed. I checked the temporary number. Nothing. I told myself this was fine. I told myself he probably had not seen it yet. I told myself most people do not check their phones at 10-something at night when they're already asleep. Then I heard it. His phone buzzed on his side of the nightstand. I heard him shift. I heard the small sound of him picking it up. I looked at the ceiling and did not move and waited. I heard him set the phone back down. He did not immediately reply. I stayed completely still on my side of the bed and kept my breathing as even as I could manage, which was not very even. Another 3 minutes passed. Then I heard him pick it up again. I could not see his face or read his body language. I was lying with my back to him, staring at the wall, holding my phone on the blanket with the temporary number open. His phone made the small tapping sound of someone typing. I felt my chest tighten. Then the sound stopped. Then it started again. Then it stopped again. Someone typing and deleting. Typing and deleting. Whatever he was composing, he was not composing it easily. The message came through on my end with a quiet buzz. My phone was face up on my chest now. I looked at it. His reply said, "Do I know you?" 3 words. I stared at them. My chest tightened further. He had not ignored it. He had not shown it to me. He had replied to a message from an unknown number at nearly 11 o'clock at night. I told myself that was a neutral thing to do. I did not believe myself. My fingers were not fully steady as I typed the second message. I told myself I needed to know the full picture. One reply from an unknown number was not enough information. I needed to see what he would do when the situation became clearer, when there was no possible innocent interpretation available. I typed, "No, but I'd love to get to know you. Your wife doesn't have to know." I read it once and sent it before I could change my mind. Then I put my phone down on my chest again and looked at the ceiling and waited. This was the real test. This was the moment that would tell me something true. The previous message could have been curiosity or confusion or simple politeness. This message was not any of those things. This message was explicit. This message gave him a choice with no ambiguity attached to it. I listened to my husband breathing on the other side of the bed. He was still. Then I heard him pick up his phone again. I heard him reading. The silence that followed was the longest I had sat with in years. I did not move. I did not breathe. I waited. The message came through after what felt like a very long time, but was probably 90 seconds. I picked up my phone. I read what Daniel had written, and the first thing I felt, before I had processed any of it, was a physical release of tension in my chest, like a knot loosening. He had written, "You have the wrong man. I love my wife more than anything in this world. Please don't text me again." I read it 3 times. Then I read it a 4th time. The words were plain and direct and completely unambiguous. No flirtation. No softening of the rejection. No curious follow-up question that would have told me he was interested even while declining. Just, "You have the wrong man. I love my wife. Please stop." I felt stupid and small and relieved all at the same time, which is a combination of feelings that is difficult to sit with. I had doubted him. I had constructed a test for him. I had sent messages designed to create a situation in which he might betray me. And he had not. He had done exactly what I believed he would do. I should have felt only relief. Instead, I felt something much more complicated. I was still holding my phone and trying to decide how to feel when I heard the sound of the covers shifting. Daniel got up. Not quickly, not with the sharp, purposeful movement of someone who has been disturbed or is reacting to something. Slowly, quietly, the way he moved at night when he was trying not to wake me. I kept my eyes closed and my breathing steady as he eased out of bed. He was good at moving quietly, a light sleeper who had trained himself to move carefully so he would not disturb other people. I heard his bare feet on the floor. I heard him leave the bedroom. I heard the soft click of the door not quite closing behind him. I lay in the dark for about 30 seconds. Then I got up. I did not turn on the bedside lamp. I moved through the bedroom in the dark the same careful way he had and reached the door and opened it just wide enough to see down the hallway. The living room light was on, low, the way it was when he did not want to wake the apartment. I could see him from where I stood. He was standing near the window with his phone at his ear. I stood in the gap of the doorway and watched him. He had his back partially to me and did not see me. His voice was very low, the specific low that people use at night when they are trying to keep a conversation private, not because they are hiding anything but because the apartment was quiet and voices carry. I could hear him, but I had to focus to pick out the words from the low murmur. He said, "Yeah, she finally tested me tonight." My blood went cold in a way that was not metaphorical. I felt it physically. A dropping sensation that started in my chest and went all the way down. Tested him. He had used that word. He had known what I was doing. And this possibility arrived half a second later and was somehow worse. He had been expecting it. He had been waiting for this. I pressed myself against the wall beside the door and tried to process that. He continued talking into the phone in his careful, quiet voice. I forced myself to stay still and listen rather than walk into the room the way every instinct in me wanted to. I needed to hear the rest. I needed to hear who he was talking to. He said, "Yeah, it hurts that she doesn't trust me." His voice was not angry. It was tired in a specific way, the tiredness of someone who has been patient about something for a long time and has just been given confirmation that the patience is still required. The voice on the other end of the phone was quiet enough that I could not distinguish words, only tone. But the tone was familiar. I knew that voice. I had known that voice for 14 years. It was Nadia. My best friend was on the other end of my husband's phone call at nearly 11 o'clock at night. And my husband had said, "She finally tested me tonight." Finally. Which meant he had expected it. Which meant Nadia had expected it too. Which meant the two of them had spoken about this, about me, about my trust, about the possibility that I would do exactly what I had just done, before this night in a conversation I did not know about. The living room was very still. I could hear my own heart. Daniel shifted positions slightly, and I pulled back from the door gap, pressing against the wall, keeping myself invisible. I needed to hear more before I walked into whatever was happening in that room. I pressed my back against the wall and listened. Daniel was speaking in the careful, quiet tones of someone managing something rather than reacting to it. He said, "I know. She has been through a lot." He said, "I just wish she felt safe enough to ask me directly instead of setting something up." There was a pause while the other side responded. Then he said, Yeah, I know. I'm not angry. He stopped. Another pause. He said, "It will be fine. I'll talk to her in the morning. Thanks for the heads up." Then he said goodnight. I heard him end the call. I heard him stand still in the living room for a moment. I heard him exhale, the long, slow exhale of someone setting something down. I stood in the hallway and felt the full weight of what I had done and what it said about me, and underneath that, the beginning of a question I had not yet formed clearly. Thanks for the heads up. He had thanked Nadia. He had received some kind of warning or information from her that I had not been aware of. The picture I was assembling was missing pieces. I stepped out of the hallway and into the living room. He saw me immediately. His expression moved through surprise, then calculation, then settled into something I could only describe as open. Not caught. Not defensive. Open. In the way that people look when they have decided that the moment for honesty has arrived, and they're going to meet it directly. I stood in the doorway between the hallway and the living room and looked at my husband, gray sleep shirt, bare feet, phone at his side, that open, tired expression. I said, "I heard you." My voice was barely above a whisper. He nodded slowly. He said, "I know." I said, "You knew I was testing you." He said, "Yes." I said, "How long have you known?" He looked at me for a moment. Then he said, "Come sit down." I said, "I want to know how first." He said, "Nadia told me." He said it simply, without making it into an accusation. He said, "Not tonight, a few weeks ago. She told me she was going to say something to you that might make you worried, and she asked me to be patient if you did something in response." I stared at him. I said, "She told you?" He walked to the sofa and sat. I crossed the room to the armchair. How we always sat for serious conversations, close enough to reach each other, but with space to think. He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and looked at me carefully. He said, "Nadia called me about 3 weeks ago. He said she had been planning something." He paused, choosing his words, something she needed his help with, and she was worried her question might backfire. He said she was afraid that what she said to you at dinner would make you anxious, and that you might do something impulsive. He said she asked me to be patient with you if you did. I looked at my husband in the low light of the living room and felt the specific combination of emotions that arrives when you have been given back more than you thought you were going to lose. I said, "What is she planning?" He looked at me for a long moment. Then he smiled, not the smile of someone who has won something, but the quiet smile of someone who is genuinely fond of the person across from them. He said, "I cannot tell you that."
I said, "Why?"
He said, "Because it would ruin the surprise." I stared at him. He held my gaze patiently. I said, "What surprise?" He said, "Nora." He said my name the way he always did when asking me to slow down and hear him, something I sometimes needed. He said, "I am not going to tell you." He said, "You're going to have to wait." I said, "Daniel." He said, "It will be worth it." I sat in the armchair and felt the shape of the last 2 hours shifting. He had known I was testing him. He had been warned in advance by my best friend. He had passed the test cleanly and without hesitation and then come out here and called her to tell her it had happened, not to confide in her about something he was hiding from me, but to let her know that her warning had been accurate. And somewhere behind all of it was a surprise that neither of them was going to tell me about. I said, "How long have you two been talking about this?" He said, "A few weeks." He said, "She called me." He said, "I want you to know that every conversation they had was about you, not behind you." He said, "There is a difference." I said, "I know." I started to cry. I did not mean to cry. They arrived without warning, the way tears do when tension has been held so long that its release bypasses your decision-making entirely. I put my hand over my mouth and Daniel was off the sofa, and beside me in the chair before I had fully registered, he had moved. He was not a man who made large physical gestures in emotional moments. He was quiet, contained, someone who showed affection through small and consistent things rather than dramatic ones. He put his arm around me and said nothing. He let me cry without trying to stop it or talk over it. Then he said, quietly beside my ear, "Next time, just ask me." I laughed. It came out through the tears as a slightly ridiculous sound, and he laughed too, softly, and I felt the tension in my chest break apart the rest of the way. I said, "I am so sorry." He said, "I know." He said, "I am not angry." I said, "You should be." He said, "Maybe." He said, "I'm not though." He said, "I know where it came from. It did not come from nothing." And that was the truest and most careful thing he could have said because he was right. It had not come from nothing. We stayed like that for a long time. The apartment was quiet. Outside, the city was doing its late-night things, distant traffic, a far-off siren, the ordinary sounds of a place that does not stop for what happens inside its apartments. Daniel did not press me to explain myself. He did not ask for the details of what I had sent or how I had sent it or where the idea had come from. He waited, the way he had always waited when I was working up to saying something important, with the particular patience of someone who has learned that pushing does not produce the thing you are hoping to hear. I said, "It did not come from nothing." He said, "I know." I said, "It has been 2 months." He said, "I know." I said, "I should have told you." He said, "Yes." He said it simply, without making it into an accusation. I said, "I saw something." I said, "In August." I said, "I do not think it was what I thought it was, but I have been carrying it since then, and I did not ask you directly because I was afraid of what asking directly might mean." He went still beside me. Then he said, "Tell me what you saw." I told him. I told him about August, coming back early from a work event, and seeing him at the coffee place 2 blocks away with a woman I did not know. They had been leaning toward each other across a small table in a way that read as intimate from where I was standing on the pavement outside. I had not gone in. I stood outside for 30 seconds, then walked home the long way, made dinner, told myself I was overreacting. He did not interrupt me while I spoke. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The woman at the coffee place." I said, "Yes." He said, "Her name is Petra." He said, "She is Nadia's older sister." I blinked. He said, "She reached out to me in July, because she was helping Nadia plan something and needed to ask me some questions about what you would want. He said, we met twice. He said, both times at that place. He said, I should have told you about it because I knew how it might look, and I chose not to because I was trying to protect the surprise and I made the wrong call. He turned to look at me directly. He said, that is the truth. All of it. I sat with that for a long moment. Nadia's older sister. A woman I had never met, meeting with my husband in August for reasons connected to something Nadia was planning for me. I thought about 2 months carrying that image, the leaning the way I had filed it, and pressed it down while it built into the thing that sent me to my phone at 10:47 on a Thursday night. I said, I should have asked you. He said, yes. He said, and I should have told you about the meetings even though I was trying to protect the surprise. He said, we both chose something that made things worse, when a direct conversation would have made them better. I said, yes. I looked at him. I said, I have spent 5 years being proud of myself for not being the jealous type. He said, I know. I said, and then I sat in our bedroom and sent my own husband a fake message from a fake number to see if he would cheat. He looked at me with that same open, honest expression. He said, you were scared. I said, that is not an excuse. He said, no. He said, but it is a reason. We talked for a long time. The clock on the wall showed midnight, then 1:30, then nearly 1. We were not arguing or building cases. We were doing what we had not done in 2 months, saying true things out loud in the same room, where they could be heard rather than carried alone. I told him about the specific quality of the fear I had been carrying. I told him that the image from August had attached itself to things that had happened before him, in a relationship that had ended badly, and that I had been doing the thing I always did when old fears arrived in new places, minimizing them, telling myself I was overreacting, pressing them down until they found a different way out. He listened to all of it without rushing me. He said, I know about those things. I said, I know you know. I said, I thought I had dealt with them. He said, you have dealt with them. This is what the remaining piece looks like, a fear you cannot always control. One that makes you do things the hard way when the easy way was there the whole time. I said, yes. He said, that is okay. He said, we're going to be okay. I called Nadia the same night, just past 1, because I could not wait and she was always awake late. She picked up on the second ring. I said, I know. She went quiet for a second. Then she said, how much do you know? I said, most of it, I think. She said, are you angry? I thought about that honestly. I said, I was for about 3 minutes. She said, and now? I said, now I am embarrassed and grateful and confused about the order in which to feel those things. She laughed. It was the laugh I knew, the one she had been giving me for 14 years whenever I managed to describe something accurately despite myself. She said, I am sorry I planted the seed. She said, I needed you to be a little unsettled. I said, why? She said, you spent 5 years being so careful not to seem suspicious that you stopped trusting your actual instincts. She said, the woman in August was Petra. She said, I know you saw them. She said, Petra told me. She said, I needed you to either ask Daniel directly or find out the truth some other way, because carrying it alone was making you smaller, and I could see it even if you could not. I said, you could have just told me it was your sister. She said, I could have. But then you would have relaxed about August and gone back to carrying everything else the same way. I wanted you to reach the thing underneath. I said, by testing my husband. She said, I knew he would pass. I said, you were very confident about that. She said, I have known Daniel 5 years, Nora. I was not guessing. I said, and the surprise. She went quiet again. Not the quiet of someone with nothing to say, the quiet of someone deciding how much to give away. She said, I am not telling you what it is. She said, you have to wait. I said, both of you are very coordinated on this point. She said, we have discussed it. I said, apparently you have discussed many things. She said, only things about you. She said, only things that we both wanted for you. I sat with that. I said, Nadia. She said, yes. I said, "You are one of the most unnecessarily complicated people I have ever known." She said, "I know." She said, "You would be bored without me." I said, "Probably."
She said goodnight.
I felt the last of the tightness leave my chest. Our anniversary was exactly 3 weeks away, the 14th of November, 5 years since Daniel and I had stood together in a small venue with 30 of our people and made promises I had never, not once, regretted. I had not connected the surprise to the anniversary until the morning after the late-night conversation. I was making coffee the next morning, thinking about what Nadia and Daniel had each said, about Petra, about the months of quiet planning, and then I set my cup down on the counter and thought, it is the anniversary trip. Daniel was standing behind me with his own coffee. He said, "What?" I said, "Nothing." I was not going to ask him. I had been told to wait, and I was going to wait, not out of fear this time, not out of anxiety, but because I now understood what the waiting was actually for.
It was not a test.
It was a gift being prepared on its own careful timeline. I had spent 2 months making myself anxious about a secret that had been kept from me, not from me. I was not going to waste the remaining 3 weeks doing it again. The 3 weeks were different from the 2 months that came before them. I noticed the difference the way you notice pressure change before rain stops. The tightness was gone, not replaced with false certainty that nothing difficult would ever happen again. I had resolved into something more honest than that. The acknowledgement that trust is not the absence of fear, but the choice to act from something better than fear when fear is available. Daniel and I talked more in those 3 weeks than we had in the 2 months before them. Not about big things exclusively, about ordinary things, the daily texture of our life together, the way conversations go when the space between two people is not compressed by something unspoken. He did not bring up the test again except when I apologized a second time. He said, "You already apologized." He said, "You are done apologizing," with the finality of someone who has genuinely decided something. I believed him. That was new too, not the belief itself, which had always been available, but the ease of it, the way believing him did not require effort or argument or the suppression of anything. On the morning of our anniversary, Daniel woke me at 6 with coffee and a folded piece of paper. I unfolded it. A printed itinerary. 5 days in Portugal, Lisbon, and then the coast, a route that Nadia had apparently been constructing for 3 months with the help of her sister Petra, who had lived there for 2 years and knew the best places. The coffee place in August. The leaning across the table. My husband and Nadia's sister planning the exact coordinates of a trip designed around everything I had told Nadia I wanted to do someday, in every conversation we had ever had about travel and dreams, and the things we were saving for later. I read it twice. Then I put it down and looked at Daniel. That quiet, steady expression I had looked at every morning for 5 years, still making me feel like I had gotten very lucky. I said, "You are a very good man." He said, "I am a man who loves his wife." I said, "Those 2 things can be the same." He said, "Yes." He said, "They usually are." I got up and I held him, and I thought about everything I had almost let fear take from me, and I held on.